gratuitas que ayudan a mejorar tu sitio web para posicionarte mejor en los motores de búsqueda. Veamos de qué se tratan. Con Site Audit puedes escanear tu sitio web para más de 100 problemas de SEO que podrían estar retrasando tu sitio en Google. Luego puedes seguir los consejos dentro de la herramienta para solucionarlos. Con Site Explorer puedes ver las palabras clave que envían tráfico a tu sitio y luego utilizar esos datos para mejorar las páginas de bajo rendimiento. Además, puedes descubrir páginas de toda la web que están enlazadas a tu sitio web. Analiza por qué pueden haber enlazado contigo y utiliza esas ideas para conseguir más menciones en línea. Visita ahrefs.com/AWT. Regístrate con una cuenta gratuita y mejora la visibilidad de tu sitio en la búsqueda hoy.
There is math and money and ROI behind it. And when we look at this new update, the helpful content update, it really strikes home the idea of Google's not crawling you to be altruistic. They're not crawling you because, well, they think you're rather cool and they'd like to be your friend. No, there's something to be gotten out of it. And more than just something to be gotten out of it, there's something to be lost by investing in your site when it does not return. We can see here that there is a site-wide modifier applied when your site's found to not be particularly helpful. What does that mean for us? Well, the cost of a query is about 1.06 cents, and Google makes about 1.61 cents. Helpful content equals profitable content. Can I return the things that I found on your site in SERP and make money from it? Because fundamentally a search engine is a business. They're not your bestie, no matter how many times they say, hey, I know you've been looking for that new vacuum. Hey, these shoes look great on you. They're really in it for this. Cost doesn't come down to just crawl. There's other pieces and components involved in here. We've got the web rendering service, robots parser, links parsers, deduplication. That's 60%. That's a lot out there. Really what we're looking at is Google wants to come to your site and treat it like a vending machine. They put in $1, they get a candy bar out. If they come in and they put in $1 and they get a candy bar back every 5 times, they're going to find another vending machine. What is your ROI? Do you think it's healthy? Sometimes it can be, and then we get charts like this that become a little bit ominous because where's the value prop in this, aside from being maybe a great ski slope, some rock climbing? Let's do it. Let's dungeoneer our way from crawl to index and find out the areas we might not see normally and check for these traps. First off, are we giving every asset a unique URL? If you make the most fantastic content in the world, it does not matter if it's not consistently available. If it's only available upon interaction, if it doesn't have a unique address to its own, people can't be taken to it. So if you're using a JavaScript framework, be sure to use a address update by the history push state and give that a unique address for users to come back to. Let's look at the breakdown of what a response header is. So when we have that crawl queue, when we go ahead and request something and get it back, the very first communications made are little bot chitter-chatters. The response headers, this very valuable information that we oftentimes tend to overlook. Server asks, Googlebot asks, server returns. We can cause bot traps here when we have inconsistent status codes. So if what was once a 200 is now a 302 or a 404, if the URL changes every time because you're using parameters to track users, it's not consistent. It eats up your ROI of investing into crawling your site. Here's a little look at what our response headers are. And if we see right here this X robots head, if that is embedded in that first response, then it stops. It's do not pass go, do not collect $200. It says in this very first knock knock, who's there? No index. Also, if we are checking in here and we perhaps are using a UAT, a staging, a dev environment, the wrong canonical URL, we're going to have a problem because when that URL is requested, it's likely unavailable or redirecting. We're causing conflicting technical signals. They waste the value that Google's putting into discovering your content on your site. Important to remember, particularly as JavaScript is everywhere, beachball.js is probably a framework being built right now. Get requests are cast, post requests are not. Activate. Beep. Don't throw volleyballs at me yet. All right, our next step, we're looking at soft 404s. So that's when we return to 200 status code. When we get there, the content says, hey, that thing you're looking for isn't really here, and maybe you did that intentionally because you're like, well, those long tail terms, we might not have that exact thing. We have something similar, or we can offer an ad. We can get them into a different conversion point. Google's constantly developing on their systems to make soft 404 detection more accurate. So you may have noticed a sharp climb in the number of 404s detected on your site. This will continue. They are very adept at nothing else but learning patterns very, very well. In order to avoid this, really do recommend we do one of two options. So if we've got this JavaScript framework, we want to either redirect to a 404 page, or we want to add a no index directive to them. Two little nice code snippets for you because you haven't been sitting in the sun drinking beer all day, and this will be easy to remember, right? Next up, we're going to parse the HTML and build the crawl DOM. So the crawl DOM is the first phase of rendering the content on here, where we take that initial HTML and we build out what we have available from it. We can get trapped near a couple of ways. If you're, again, using a JavaScript framework and it has a shadow DOM, Simba, that's the dark place. We must not go there. We need to clone that content into the light DOM. As we execute our scripts, our CSS, our JavaScript, this is when we build our rendered DOM. Rendering is a process of turning HTML into pixels. Caveat, Googlebot does not have eyes. So when we look at screenshots, they're great, they're lovely, but they're not an accurate reflection of the content. So don't rely on those. Always take that HTML and look for yourself to see what content is there. You can grab the HTML that Googlebot has rendered existing in the cache by going into URL Inspector. Do note that if you are using the live URL inspection tool, that bypasses Google's very aggressive cache. So some of the scripts generated content that may return other error isn't actually erroring out. They don't even acknowledge cache control anymore. They're like, no, we'll keep that as long as we want to. You didn't actually change it. So when we come to actually building the page, we're going to take that crawl DOM and the resources collected and put them into the web rendering service pipeline. Here's a brief kind of sketch on what that looks like. So we tend to think of Google as this monolithic great thing that's a black box no one can really see into, yeah? Well, it turns out Chromium's open sourced, and they're a very wonderful community who will communicate with you anything you'd like to know, should you just go ahead and ask. So we know Chromium is using Blink for the browser engine, V8 for the JavaScript engine. We have a couple other fancy parts in here and the whole heap of Google magic to go ahead and render a page exactly as Googlebot does and as Bingbot does. Bing actually switched over to using Chromium as this web rendering service, which means we don't have additional homework for another search engine, and that makes everyone happy. So traditional parsing usually runs on the main thread, and if we are using scripts, we have to wait. I was going to skip this slide anyways. I had too many beers in the sun today. We're going to go over this one. Let's go to collecting resources, because this is actually where it becomes a little deeper into how we can help find those little crawl sucks that are eating away in our budget. So we have a bunch of resources that are used in any given page, and every resource that you call, even if it doesn't actually contribute to the content on the page, is going towards what they're investing for you and your crawl budget. So Googlebot won't see past a initial HTML no index or one in the robots.txt to get there. This is an old version of the deck, so some things are out of date. Let's find out what happens here. Please do remember that Googlebot is like that T-Rex in Jurassic Park. It cannot see you if you don't have an A element with an H attribute. So if you're using on spans, if you're using on clicks, anything other than A elements, A for attributes, you're not going to find those links, any resources that go to them. If you're wondering why Googlebot's not crawling all the content from this lovely new landing page you made, check this bit. This is not the most recent version of the deck. This is amazing. Nah? Okay. So one of the problems we have in finding the number of resources that we're using is oftentimes we have a giant city, especially if you're an enterprise. It's not just www.example.com. You have cdnexample.net. You have all these third-party tools you're using. They also contribute content to your page, and therefore you want them found, you want them used wisely, you want them discovered. A couple of great ways that you can go out and find all these resources. If we look at Built With, you do not need to pay to get a pro account, and it tells you, hey, did you know about all these subdomains that you had? Did you know all these are hanging out here? And sometimes you actually even find duplicates that are fighting your site. We can also look at top linking sites in GSC. If you see an IP like this, oftentimes load balancers, public-facing CDNs, anything like that, it can be crawled, it can be indexed. If your logic says, I'm gonna return the relative host name of whatever host I was requested at, this is how we get our friend right here. This can be eating up your crawl budget. If it's going to face the public, verify it. Verify that property in Search Console, so that way, if it does suddenly become indexed, you know all about it. You have everything you need to know. We also have indexable API endpoints that pop up everywhere. That's where we're loading in content via AJAX, so asynchronous JavaScript and XML. When we use these, or anything where we're embedding it into the page, we don't want the individual URL itself to be indexed. Let's go ahead and use a pretty newly minted robots directive called the index of embedded. So this is how we handle that iframe, our endpoints, anything out there where it's contributing to a page, it's got a separate address of its own. We want to make sure the one representative page is the one that ranks and does well for us. Ooh, look, time machine, working back. All right, as we're building our full render DOM, we're also executing all the scripts here, and you can see this in in Chrome DevTools. The yellow right here shows us where we have scripts executing. Purple shows where we're actually painting those to be pixels on the page. And the gap between those points is pretty substantial. And this is important because as we build out all these things, again, if we call it, if we say it should be built, even if it doesn't contribute to the page, it's going to be called, it's going to be built, it's going to count towards you. So, we can see what JavaScript does here. It's adding to our body, adding content into it. It's important to remember, if you are shipping parts of things like your structured data markup in the initial HTML, and then the rest of it in your rendered DOM, if you split those and you don't copy it over to the next layer, Googlebot flattens content as it renders it. So each layer gets flattened down nice and even. Better to keep one copy than to keep the 15 revisions that came before it. And if you split them, you're not going to have full markup. You can have two halves of broken markup. If we've got blocked resources, Google cannot see what it cannot render. If you want your content to be found, it has to be made available to the users. So if we want to have effective resource restriction, remember the robots.txt is your friend in many, many ways, just not all the ones we typically think of. So our robots.txt is fantastic for blocking personalization resources, anything that's not really meant for a user, or sorry, for a search engine. So if you have that script that's running for autocomplete on your search bar, don't give that to Googlebot. They're not going to type. They don't have fingers. It's a bot. We can use the xrobots directives for that index of embedded. That's a really effective way to make sure that we're only indexing the content we meant to. We want to block non-critical resources that don't contribute in a meaningful way. No one came to your blog for that giant above the fold stock photo. Sorry, I have to break it to you right now. And again, really important to call this out. Robots.txt does not prevent you from being indexed. Robots.txt controls crawling. Robots directives, hi, I'm one of your friends. Robots directives control index coverage. All right, if we have an iframe in the head, we find out who put it there and we say, please never do that again. Iframe has its own closing head tag, and that means it decapitates your page, shoving critical meta information and tags down into the body where they don't do anything. It's a very sad time. If we rely on data persistence, we're not going to have an effective experience for Googlebot. Googlebot is stateless. It's not going to allow cookies or session storage. It will not tap. It will not interact. It will not grant location permissions. It does not care how much you want to know where they are. It will also interrupt CPU consumption. And it makes sense. So if you've written a script that just keeps going and going and going, it seems pretty reasonable to go, someone might have made an infinite loop in here and I'm just gonna exit out and meander on this way. And I respect that because I am a mere squishy mortal meat bag and I don't even want to deal with that kind of web page. If this shows up for a user, Googlebot's gonna give up too. Please, don't ship what you don't need. The most effective resources, the most optimized JavaScript you have is the one that you didn't send because you realize the other marketing tool, because you have 17 in there, I've seen the head of your page, already has the same functionality and you thought wise to consolidate it and make a streamlined experience for all involved. Document.write, great idea if you're using any of those A/B testing platforms, which is a whole nother rabbit hole, but it really mucks up everyone's Christmas. It's a bit like if you read ahead the next chapter for class and then the professor goes, oh, we're actually doing this book this week. We're not even gonna do the homework that you thought was going to be in queue. Speculative parsing is great. It's how modern browsers are so effective. They can guess what's gonna come next, and document.write goes, nope, we're actually switching the entire curriculum. We're gonna go over here now. So when we lay out the render tree, this is where you get to things like Core Web Vitals, because we're beginning to take all the elements that we set out on the page and build them onto the frame. It's a good time for all. See, it's lovely visualization. We've taken all those lovely components from before, and we're putting them together to make a meaningful page that fits to scale the viewport the user is interacting with. I'm trying to give people time to take photos. I also don't want to get with beach balls. How do you cut that line? This is where we get things like CLS becoming an issue. So if you're shoving things down, that means it calculated everything, and then you went, oh, and this, and then I had to whoosh, push that all down. No human likes that. Never, ever. We can see here a great example in bulky, unused scripts. You can find how many are actually being utilized by going to Chrome DevTools. Yes, you could download a 15th extension today, or you could use a native built-in functionality that's already waiting for you in Chrome DevTools. Highly recommend the latter. No security breaches in that one. But if we go ahead and check out our coverage, we can see how much was used, how much was not, and identify areas where we can cut that back. If you can, if it's below the fold, use asynchronous or deferred scripts. That means it can wait its turn. It doesn't get to block everything else coming onto the page in order to do its thing. When we get to our index processing, remember, this is from Eric Hendricks, who is a software engineer at Google, talking about rendering at the Web Conference 2019. Hey, we crawl your page as Googlebot. We use Chromium. What we get out of that is what gets in the index. If you want it to rank, it has to be indexed. If you want it to be indexed, it has to be rendered. If you want it to be rendered, it has to be crawled. Googlebot is code. Code runs in order. It's not so scary. All right. Oh, we can also find some great duplicates. So if we're wondering why our content is ranking as well as we thought, hop into GA and go into your primary dimension. This is the behavior landing page report. Swap over the primary dimension from being the landing page to being the host name. And now you can see, oh look, I've got some local pages, some local dev. Oh look, there's a scraper site. It's a pretty handy little spot to look. And also your crawl stats in GSC. If you have not yet verified your Search Console property, I highly recommend that, because then any subdomain beneath that, you get insights into from that property. So you could see in here if, oh look, this functionality subdomain is being crawled a ton. It was never intended for Googlebot to see or for even public consumption. Now we know how to act and where to go ahead and fix that. And most of all, don't be afraid to learn in public. Thank you so much. I hope everyone's having a fantastic end of day one. Go get more beer.
I really struggled with her too.
She was very technical.
Okay.